Princess Scilara sat in her chamber, her sharp claws tapping against the armrest of her ornate chair. Her golden eyes, filled with worry, stared at the holographic display floating before her. The announcement had been made. The Zovari Empire and the United Turan Republic had reached an agreement, a marriage treaty, and she was the one being offered to a human. Her stomach twisted at the thought. Humans were dangerous, unpredictable, and ruthless. At least that was what the stories said. Her people had long believed that humans were nothing more than warmongers, expanding their influence through force and intimidation. Now she was expected to stand beside one of them, bound by an alliance she had no say in. Her attendants moved silently around her, preparing her ceremonial attire. The long silver and blue gown shimmered under the soft glow of the chamber's lights, its intricate patterns representing the unity of the Zovari race. But Scilara felt anything but united with this arrangement. One of her closest aides, Velik, approached her with a deep bow. "Princess, it is time." She let out a slow breath, standing gracefully. Her tall, slender frame carried the weight of her royal bloodline. But at this moment, she felt like a prisoner walking toward an uncertain fate. The grand hall doors slid open, revealing the throne room filled with nobles, council members, and high-ranking officials. And at the far end, standing tall in his military uniform, was him, Captain Daniel Cross. Scilara had imagined a monster, cold, cruel, a man who would look at her with nothing but conquest in his eyes. But when their gazes met, her heart stilled. He was nothing like she expected. His eyes, deep, thoughtful, and calm, held no trace of arrogance or cruelty. Instead, they held something that unsettled her even more. Understanding, as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. She forced herself to move forward, her footsteps light but deliberate. She would not show fear. She would not let a human see her doubt. Daniel remained still, his posture disciplined yet relaxed. He didn't smirk, didn't leer, didn't act like a man who had just won a great prize. He simply bowed his head slightly in respect. "Your Highness," he greeted in a voice that was firm, but not harsh. Sciara's sharp ears twitched at the tone. Not demanding, not mocking, just neutral. "The honor is mine," she replied, keeping her voice even. She studied him closely, his broad shoulders, his confident stance, the light scars on his hands that spoke of experience in battle. But it was his expression that unnerved her most. There was no aggression, no hunger for power, just quiet patience. The High Chancellor of the Zovari Empire stepped forward, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. "Today marks a new era for both our people. This union will strengthen the bond between our civilizations and ensure lasting peace." Scilara kept her face unreadable, though her mind raced. Peace. Through this, could she truly trust that? Daniel turned to face the gathered nobles, speaking with steady confidence. "I know this is an unusual arrangement. Many of you may doubt my intentions." He glanced at Scilara for a brief moment before continuing. "But let me be clear. I do not come here as a conqueror. I do not seek to take anything from the Zovari. I only wish to build something together, something stronger than war or politics." A murmur ran through the crowd, some skeptical, some intrigued. Scilara wasn't sure what she expected from him, but this wasn't it. His words lacked arrogance. There was no demand, no assertion of dominance. He spoke like someone who truly wanted peace. Still, words could be deceptive. The ceremony continued with formalities, but Scilara barely listened. Her focus remained on the human before her. There was something strange about him, something she couldn't quite name. As the event ended, she found herself standing beside him as their people conversed. He turned his head slightly toward her and spoke low enough that only she could hear. "I know you don't trust me," he said, not accusingly, but as a simple fact. "I don't blame you for that." Sciara's fingers twitched at her sides. "Then why go through with this?" Daniel met her gaze once more, and there it was again, that unsettling, steady calm. "Because sometimes trust isn't given. It's earned. Her breath hitched for just a second. A response lingered on her tongue, but she hesitated. Instead, she simply turned away, leaving him with only silence. She didn't know what to make of Captain Daniel Cross, but she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Princess Scifi sat in the grand dining hall, her golden eyes watching the human across the table. The long banquet was meant to celebrate the alliance, but she barely touched her food. Her mind was too busy trying to understand Captain Daniel Cross. She had expected arrogance, but he had shown humility. She had expected dominance, but he had offered respect. She had expected a conqueror, but instead, he seemed patient, too patient. He sat calmly, speaking with the Zovari officials as if he belonged here. He wasn't stiff or nervous, nor did he try too hard to impress. He simply was, and that disturbed her more than anything. "You are quiet, princess," Daniel said suddenly, his voice smooth but unreadable. Scifi's claws lightly tapped against her goblet. "I have little to say." Daniel smirked slightly. "I doubt that." She stiffened, her pride flaring. "You assume much, human." He chuckled. "I assume nothing. I simply observe." His words made her uneasy. Was he studying her, trying to understand her weaknesses? Humans were said to be manipulative, after all. She would not be deceived. The Chancellor stood and raised his glass. "To the future of the Zovari Empire and the United Terran Republic. May this alliance bring prosperity to both worlds." A chorus of agreement filled the hall, and Scifi lifted her glass as tradition demanded. Daniel did the same, his movements smooth and effortless. He didn't seem like a man forced into this union. As the feast continued, Scifi's closest advisor, Velik, leaned toward her. "Be careful, princess," he whispered. "Humans are clever. He may seem harmless, but that is how they trap you." Scifi nodded slightly, though she wasn't sure she needed the warning. She was already on guard. A servant approached, offering Daniel a rare Zovari dish, an exotic fruit known to be bitter and unpleasant to outsiders. A test. If he rejected it, it would show weakness. If he ate it and reacted poorly, he would be mocked. Scifi expected hesitation, but Daniel simply picked up the fruit and took a bite. The room fell silent, all eyes on him. He chewed, swallowed, and nodded. "Interesting flavor," he said, completely unfazed. "Reminds me of something from Earth." Murmurs spread across the hall. He had passed the test without flinching. Scifi's tail flicked in irritation. He was not behaving like the human she had heard about. Was it an act? A trick? After the feast, Scifi found herself walking through the palace gardens, seeking a moment of solitude. But footsteps behind her told her she was not alone. "You're following me," she said without turning. Daniel chuckled. "I wouldn't call it following. More like walking in the same direction." She sighed, glancing at him. He looked relaxed, his hands behind his back, as he admired the glowing plants of her homeworld. "You handled yourself well tonight," she admitted. He raised an eyebrow. That almost sounded like a compliment. She narrowed her eyes. "Do not mistake my words for approval." "Wouldn't dream of it," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. They walked in silence for a moment. Scifi felt something strange. Annoyance, yes, but also curiosity. Finally, she stopped and faced him. "Tell me the truth, Captain. What do you really want from this?" Daniel held her gaze, his blue eyes steady. "I want peace." She scoffed. "Peace? Humans do not make peace. They conquer." His expression didn't change. "Have you met many humans, princess?" She hesitated. "No." He nodded. "Then maybe your people don't know us as well as they think." His words unsettled her. What if he was right? What if the stories about humans were incomplete? She turned away, her thoughts a storm inside her mind. Daniel Cross was a mystery, and mysteries were dangerous. But for the first time she wondered, was he really the enemy she had feared? Princess Silera sat on her balcony, looking over the city as the twin moons bathed the Zovari capital in silver light. The grand towers stretched into the sky, a symbol of her people's strength. Yet tonight, she felt uncertain. Her whole life, she had been raised to believe humans were dangerous, brutal creatures. And yet, Captain Daniel Cross had shown no signs of cruelty. He was strong, yes, but not aggressive. Confident, but not arrogant. Why was he so different from the stories? A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. "Enter," she said, straightening her posture. Velik, her loyal advisor, stepped inside. His golden eyes were sharp with concern. "Princess, you spent time alone with the human." Silera sighed. "He is not what I expected." Velik frowned. "You cannot trust him. He hides his true nature. That is what humans do." She looked away. "Then why does he not act like a conqueror?" Velik hesitated. "Perhaps he is patient, waiting for the right moment." Silera exhaled slowly. "Or perhaps our people have misjudged them." Velik stiffened. "Princess." She raised a hand. "Enough. I will judge him with my own eyes." Velik bowed slightly, but did not look pleased. "Then at least test him. If he is honorable, he will prove it." Silera considered his words. A test. Yes, that would reveal the truth. The next day, Silera arranged for a sparring session. If Daniel was a warrior, he would not refuse. And if he was truly different from the humans in the stories, his actions in battle would show it. When she arrived at the royal training grounds, Daniel was already waiting. He wore a simple combat uniform, his stance relaxed yet ready. "I hear you wish to fight me, princess," he said with a smirk. Silera unsheathed her twin blades, their edges shimmering in the light. "Not a fight, a test." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly are you testing?" She twirled her blades expertly. "Your strength, your intentions, your honor." Daniel chuckled. "And if I refuse?" She tilted her head. "Then you prove you are weak." He sighed and stepped forward. "Fine, but I don't use swords." Silera frowned. "Then how will you fight?" He raised his fists. "With these." She stared at him. No weapon, just his hands. Was this arrogance or confidence? "Very well," she said, taking her stance. The fight began. Silera lunged, her blades moving in quick, precise strikes. But Daniel dodged with surprising speed, his movements fluid and controlled. He didn't attack recklessly. He didn't panic. He studied her. She pressed forward, increasing her speed. But he kept up, evading, redirecting, always just out of reach. And then, in a single smooth motion, he caught her wrist and twisted, disarming her without harming her. In an instant, she was on the ground, his strong grip holding her in place. But he did not hurt her. He did not gloat. He simply let go and stepped back. "You're fast," he admitted, "but predictable." Silera's heart pounded. He had beaten her, without a weapon, without aggression. Just skill. She sat up, breathing heavily. "You could have killed me." He extended a hand to help her up. "That's not why I'm here." She hesitated, then took his hand. His grip was firm but gentle. For the first time, she saw him clearly, not as an enemy, but as a warrior, a man of honor. Perhaps she had been wrong about him. Princess Silera sat on the edge of the training ground, her mind still replaying the fight. She had expected brute force from Captain Daniel Cross, but he had been precise, controlled. He could have harmed her, humiliated her, but he hadn't. Instead, he had shown restraint. She watched as he cleaned the sweat from his brow, his blue eyes thoughtful. "You're strong," he said finally. "But strength isn't just about power. It's about knowing when to use it." Silera narrowed her eyes. "And what do you know of strength, human?" Daniel chuckled. "More than you think." She studied him carefully. "You are not like the humans I was told about." He met her gaze, And maybe your people aren't like the aliens we were told about. The words hung between them. Scifi had spent her whole life believing that humans were conquerors, that they only took what they wanted. But Daniel Cross, he had taken nothing. Instead, he had given her something else. Doubt. Doubt that everything she had believed was true. The doors to the training hall opened, and Velik entered, his expression tight. "Princess," he said, ignoring Daniel. "The council has summoned you." Scifi frowned. "For what purpose?" Velik hesitated. "It concerns your suitor." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's me, right?" Scifi sighed and stood up. "Come," she said, brushing past him. "Let us see what my people have planned for you." The council chamber was filled with high-ranking Zovari officials. The air was tense, heavy with unspoken conflict. At the head of the table sat Chancellor Vorin, an elder with piercing silver eyes. Scifi took her seat while Daniel remained standing. "Captain Daniel Cross," Vorin began, his voice deep and commanding. "You have proven yourself capable, but the council still has doubts." Daniel crossed his arms. "Doubts?" Vorin nodded. "The alliance between our species is fragile. If you are to be bonded to our princess, we must know you are worthy." Scifi tensed. Another test. Daniel's expression remained unreadable. "And how do I prove that?" Vorin leaned forward. "A mission. A Zovari outpost at the edge of our territory has gone silent. You will investigate it, with the princess at your side." Scifi's tail twitched. "You want me to go with him?" Velik nodded. "If he is to be trusted, he must face danger at your side." Daniel smirked. "So, a field trip." Vorin's gaze darkened. "You may not return." Silence filled the chamber. Scifi studied Daniel's face, expecting hesitation. But to her surprise, he only shrugged. "When do we leave?" Scifi felt something strange in her chest. Admiration. No, it was simply curiosity. Nothing more. She turned to the council. "Prepare the ship. We leave at once." Hours later, Scifi and Daniel stood in the docking bay. The royal ship was sleek, designed for speed rather than combat. A small crew would accompany them, but the mission's success depended on them alone. As they prepared to board, Scifi stole a glance at Daniel. "You agreed quickly," she said. "You do not fear what awaits us." He smirked. "Fear doesn't stop me." She frowned. "Then what does?" His expression turned serious. "Breaking a promise." Scifi tilted her head. "A promise?" Daniel nodded. "I promised my people I would see this alliance through, and I keep my promises." Scifi wasn't sure why, but those words settled something inside her. For the first time since meeting him, she felt a flicker of trust. And for the first time in her life, she wondered, could a human's promise truly be stronger than a Zovari's doubts? The royal ship cut through the darkness of space, heading toward the silent Zovari outpost. Inside the cockpit, Captain Daniel Cross leaned against the control panel, arms crossed, eyes scanning the starry expanse. Princess Scifi sat beside him, her fingers tapping on the armrest. She had insisted on piloting the ship herself. Trusting the human with her people's technology was still a step too far. Behind them, Velik and two Zovari warriors stood in silence, fully armored and ready for battle. The air was thick with tension, but Daniel seemed unaffected. "How long until we reach the outpost?" he asked. Scifi didn't look at him. "An hour." He nodded, then smirked. "Plenty of time for you to admit you trust me." Scifi scoffed. "Trust is earned, not given." Daniel chuckled. "And how exactly do I earn it?" She finally turned to face him. "By proving you will not abandon us when things become difficult." Daniel's expression hardened. "I don't abandon people." Scifi held his gaze for a moment. His voice carried no arrogance, no deception, only certainty. She had met many warriors, but few had such quiet confidence. Before she could respond, an alert flashed on the control panel. "We're entering the outpost sector," she announced. Daniel leaned forward. Can you pick up any signals? Silara's fingers danced over the console, scanning for life signs. Nothing. The station is completely silent. Velik stepped closer. That is not possible. Even in emergencies, there should be distress signals. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then something silenced them. A heavy silence filled the cockpit. The station loomed ahead, a dark structure against the void. Its usual glowing lights were gone, making it look like a lifeless husk. Silara exhaled slowly. Prepare for landing. The docking bay was eerily quiet as they stepped onto the station. Silara's boots echoed against the metal floor. The emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows. Daniel walked beside her, his posture alert. He held no visible weapon, yet she knew he was prepared. Velik and the warriors spread out, scanning the area. No bodies, Velik murmured. No sign of struggle. Silara frowned. Where is everyone? Daniel knelt beside a console, brushing dust off the screen. This station was abandoned in a hurry. He tapped a few buttons, but the system was unresponsive. Then, a low hum filled the air. Silara stiffened. What was that? Daniel stood up, his eyes sharp. Something is still active. Suddenly, a door at the far end slid open with a hiss. The group tensed, weapons ready. Silara raised her blade. Stay together. They moved cautiously through the dark corridors. The silence was unnatural, pressing against them like a weight. Then, movement. A shadow flickered at the edge of their vision. Hold, Daniel whispered, his stance shifting. Silara's heart pounded. Show yourself, she commanded. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a figure stumbled into the dim light, a Zovari scientist, his uniform torn, his breathing ragged. Silara rushed forward. What happened here? The scientist's eyes were wide with terror. They came from the dark. Velik grabbed his shoulder. Who? The scientist shuddered. Not pirates, not mercenaries, something else. Daniel frowned. Where did they go? The scientist pointed toward the lower levels. They are waiting, watching. His voice broke. They will come for you too. A sudden clang echoed through the hall. Daniel's muscles tensed. We're not alone. Silara gripped her blades tighter. She had come here expecting pirates, rebels, or even human trickery. But now she realized something far worse awaited them in the dark. And for the first time, she was glad Daniel Cross was by her side. The silence of the abandoned outpost felt heavier with every passing second. The flickering emergency lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, and every breath felt too loud in the emptiness. Daniel Cross scanned the corridor ahead, his muscles tense. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. This wasn't just a fight. It felt like a trap. Princess Silara stood beside him, her twin blades ready. Her people were warriors, trained from birth to face any enemy, but even she could feel the unnatural stillness in the air. Velik kept his weapon raised, his sharp eyes searching the darkness. The injured scientist they had found earlier sat against the wall, trembling, his hands clutching his torn uniform. They took them, the scientist whispered, his voice hoarse. One by one, the moment the lights failed. Silara narrowed her eyes. Who took them? The scientist shook his head. Not soldiers, not pirates. His breathing became erratic. They whispered in the dark. They watched us. A sudden metallic clang echoed through the corridor. Everyone froze. Daniel's hand went to his sidearm. He had a bad feeling about this. Velik signaled to his warriors. Stay close. We do not split up. The group moved forward carefully. Every step echoed in the empty hallways, and the dim lights flickered as if struggling to stay alive. Then, another sound. A scraping noise. Slow, deliberate. Daniel raised his weapon. We're being hunted. Silara's grip on her blades tightened. Then we hunt back. They turned a corner and came upon a control room, The large monitors were shattered, and the chairs were overturned. Something had happened here, something violent. Daniel knelt beside the control panel. If I can restore partial power, we might be able to see what happened. Scifi gestured to Velik and the others. Guard the entrance. Velik nodded, his warriors taking position. Daniel worked quickly, his fingers flying over the damaged console. Sparks flew as he forced a bypass. Then the screen flickered to life. The security footage was distorted, but they could make out figures. Scifi scientists running, panic in their movements. And then, from the shadows, dark shapes emerged. Daniel leaned in. Pause it. Scifi froze as she saw them. Tall, thin figures with elongated limbs. Their bodies were covered in dark exoskeleton-like armor. Their eyes, black voids, reflected the emergency lights. They moved fast, too fast. The footage showed them grabbing scientists and dragging them into the vents. No screams, no struggle, just silence. Velik clenched his jaw. What are they? The scientist behind them shuddered. We called them Watchers. Daniel frowned. Watchers? They don't speak. They don't kill right away. They wait. They observe. His voice was shaking. They are still here. As if answering his words, the lights flickered again. Then, darkness. The power shut down. A deep, crawling silence filled the room. Then, click, click, click. A rhythmic tapping, like claws on metal. Scifi whispered, "They're coming." Daniel activated the flashlight on his wrist, casting a beam of light toward the doorway. For a second, nothing moved. Then, eyes, black, hollow, and watching. A watcher stood at the entrance, unmoving. Its elongated fingers curled against the frame. Its body was almost featureless, blending into the shadows. Daniel exhaled. We need to move. Now. Scifi didn't argue. She grabbed the scientist and pulled him to his feet. Velik fired his weapon. The blast of plasma hit the creature directly, only for it to disappear into the shadows, vanishing as if it was never there. The air turned colder. They're playing with us, Daniel muttered. The corridor behind them suddenly erupted with noise. Multiple figures moved in the dark, fast and silent. Scifi pushed Daniel forward. Run. They sprinted down the hallway, weapons ready. The Watchers moved alongside them in the shadows, never fully stepping into the dim light. Ahead, a set of emergency escape pods came into view. Velik shouted, "Go." The scientist stumbled, nearly falling. Daniel grabbed him, dragging him forward. The Watchers closed in. Clawed hands reached from the darkness. One of the warriors screamed as he was yanked into the shadows. Silence followed. Scifi turned, eyes wide. No. Daniel pulled her forward. We can't help him now. Velik and the remaining warriors covered their escape, firing shots into the darkness. Finally, they reached the pods. Scifi slammed the panel, forcing one open. Daniel shoved the scientist inside. Go. Now. The Watchers swarmed the corridor, moving like liquid shadows. Scifi turned back, blades drawn. We hold them here. Daniel met her eyes. We do this together. She nodded. The Watchers lunged. And the fight for survival truly began. The air was thick with tension. The shadows around them twisted, moving unnaturally as the Watchers closed in. Their black, hollow eyes reflected the dim emergency lights, their elongated fingers stretching toward their prey. Daniel Cross gritted his teeth and tightened his grip on his weapon. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had faced death before, but never like this. Princess Scifi stood beside him, her twin blades gleaming as she took a battle stance. Her breathing was steady, her expression fierce. These creatures might be terrifying, but she was not afraid to fight. Velik and his remaining warriors raised their weapons, ready to cover the escape. The emergency pod door was open behind them, and the scientist was already inside. his eyes wide with fear. The watchers moved like liquid shadows, fast and silent. Then, without warning, they attacked. A blur of motion, clawed hands reaching. Daniel fired. The plasma shot burned through the darkness, striking the watcher in the chest. But instead of falling, the creature twisted, its body shifting unnaturally, absorbing the impact. Silura lunged, her blades flashing. She slashed through another watcher's arm. But there was no blood, only a strange, inky darkness where the wound should be. "They're not normal creatures," Daniel shouted. Velik roared as he shot another one. "We don't have to kill them, just escape." The watchers hissed, their whisper-like voices filling the air. More of them crawled from the vents, their thin, spindly limbs moving like they were gliding through the air. Daniel grabbed Silara's wrist. "Go. Now." Silara hesitated. She didn't want to run from a fight, but she knew he was right. The longer they stayed, the less chance they had of making it out alive. She turned and dashed toward the escape pod. Velik covered their retreat, firing at the creatures as he backed up. "Get in. I'll seal the door." Daniel shoved Silara inside the pod. The scientist was already curled up in the corner, shaking. "Velik, now," Daniel yelled. But Velik didn't move. His warriors were still outside, locked in battle with the watchers. One of them screamed as he was pulled into the darkness, vanishing in an instant. Daniel's stomach twisted. They couldn't save everyone. Silara's eyes flashed with anger. "We can't just." But Velik made the decision for them. With one final shot, he leaped backward into the pod and slammed his fist against the control panel. The door sealed shut. A loud, high-pitched screech filled the air as the watchers clawed at the metal. The pod trembled under their force. Then, silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Daniel exhaled. "Are they gone?" The answer came as a violent shake. The watchers were trying to tear the pod apart. "We need to launch. Now." Silara slammed the emergency release. The pod detached. Gravity shifted as they were pulled away from the outpost. The sudden acceleration sent them tumbling inside the small cabin. Through the window, they could see the station getting smaller, but the watchers were still there. Hundreds of them, watching, waiting. The silence was unnerving. The creatures made no move to leave the outpost. They didn't pursue the pod. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "They let us go." Velik wiped sweat from his forehead. "Or they don't care about us anymore." Silara's grip on her blades tightened. This wasn't just an attack. She turned to Daniel. "They were testing us." Daniel met her gaze. "Then what happens when they decide they're done testing?" Nobody answered. The pod systems beeped as it locked onto a nearby ship, a Zovari war vessel. The radio crackled to life, and a voice came through. "Unidentified pod, identify yourselves." Silara pressed the communicator. "This is Princess Silara of the Zovari Empire. We are survivors from the outpost. Prepare for emergency docking." There was a pause. Then, "Understood, Your Highness. Docking in progress." Relief washed over the group, but Daniel couldn't shake the unease in his chest. The watchers were still out there, watching, waiting, and something told him this wasn't the last time they would meet.